So what's that going to mean for business travel going forward? How is it going to manifest itself? Well, we don't really know. Again, these are all very new grounds that are being plowed, new fields, if you will. So what we really can look at, though, is some of the models of countries that have experienced the pandemic and have done a reasonably good job of managing it. So you first and foremost have to look at China as a possible model for giving some foresight into what the future is going to hold. And when you look at China post-COVID and how their business travel began to return to some level of new normalcy, there was clearly a four-step process within China that started off with regional travel by car or train, in which people could either travel in a way that really enabled them to maintain social distancing, or not make the travel. And we saw that within China, and we're also seeing that within the U.S. We saw it before this most recent surge, in that there was a bit of a return to business travel, but it was very much the travel that you could go to on your own and control your own destiny, like in a car or on a train, where you've got the ability to maintain that social distancing because you're not packed into the car like into an airplane or a bus. The second step in the process was that domestic air travel would be approved on a limited basis for critical in-person meetings. But one of the things that we also saw related to the second phase and the third phase was that those critical travel authorizations also ensured that there wasn't the normal business aura, if you will. And by that, I mean that you didn't have business dinners associated with these meetings. You didn't have get to know you social hours or cocktail receptions or things of that nature that required people to remove their masks and potentially put social distancing at risk. Because one of the things that also the Chinese have shown us is that the continuation of the utilization of masks and social distancing, good personal hygiene continued, even during the time when China actually had very little in the way of growth of COVID-19. And then the last step in the process, although this is still very, very slow in its development, has been the intercontinental travel. And we think that that's going to continue to be the case as business travel evolves post-COVID-19, certainly within the chemical and petrochemical space. The other thing that I think is important to note as we look for solutions to kickstart, if you will, the return of business travel was that some countries have explored the required having a vaccination certification or having a pre-test certification. These are probably not going to be long-term solutions that are going to help restart the business travel industry. Those types of issues are fraught with lots of risks and vulnerabilities as it relates to privacy, fraud, hacking, and to counterfeiting. And we've seen all of those instances occurring around the world as countries have tried to implement these types of solutions that would ensure that a passenger was not a carrier of the disease. And so that's probably not going to be a long-term solution to restart the business travel business. Next slide, please. So what is the future as it relates to business travel? Well, again, we're looking for information that will help us with these forecasting. And before I go any further, I think it is important that it is very likely that going forward, post-COVID-19, which has had a significant impact on the psyche of business travelers as well as societies writ large, is that it is very likely that there's going to be a much bigger emphasis on trying to forecast and predict as much as is practical the evolution of new pandemic type risks. And so there is going to be a lot of pressure and a lot of market demand for an indications and warnings process to be able to forecast as much as possible the evolution of changing pandemic environments that might affect business and might affect business travel. We saw a little bit of that occurring early on in this pandemic, back in early January of 2020, when some companies were offering that service and were offering up a forewarning of an evolving issue. But I think that one of the things that will come out of this COVID pandemic is that service is going to have to be much more mature and much more reliable in its predictive capability. But one of the things that I think is really important to understand the mindset of our business travelers is looking at some of the surveys that are coming out, some recent ones of U.S. companies, and there's been actually some very good ones recently involving thousands of U.S. companies that are giving some real insights into the mindset of companies as it relates to vaccines as well as employees. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that due to employee relation concerns, about half of the companies in the U.S. that have been surveyed have said they've already decided they're not going to require the vaccine because of the impact that would have on their employee relations. And nearly a third of the companies that haven't yet made that decision are saying that they're leaning in that direction as well. And if you total those two together, that's going to be well over 2/3 to 3/4 of the companies are likely going to take that outcome as it relates to vaccines and their employees. And about a third of the employees are saying they're not really inclined to get a COVID vaccine, even if it's required by their employer. Now, that number is actually declining, but it's still a significant group of people that may get in the way of creating the herd immunity that we're all looking for. And I'm bringing this up because it's really important to understand that as we look at the return to business travel, it's going to be the safety concepts and the safety sense that our employees have that are going to drive this. And it's going to drive a company in putting together policies and procedures that indicate or that give comfort to the employees as to whether it is in fact safe to go ahead and travel. And again, if you use the model that was in place pre-COVID, is that when you asked business travelers to go somewhere that there was a security risk, they felt much more comfortable if there were processes and procedures in place to ensure their security safety, so they were not, for example, kidnapped or subject to criminal activity when they were there. That same model is very, very likely going to be insisted upon by our business travelers moving forward as to how do we protect from becoming infected by COVID-19 going forward. And the airlines and the hotels and the other related travel industries that are innovative and incorporate the safety protocols into their core business processes are going to be able to discriminate themselves from their competitors, and they're going to be the ones that business travelers are going to be most interested in utilizing going forward. And again, just as an example of that from an innovation perspective, is that some of the airlines that are looking at this hard are looking at new ways of, for example, rewarding frequent flyers and upgrading instead of upgrading to, for example, a higher class from coach to premium coach or premium coach to business class or whatnot. One of the things that they are looking at is that can they incorporate, for example, a social distancing upgrades to where you put travelers into areas to where they're able to easily maintain that 5 or 6 feet of distance during the course of the flight. So innovation and creativity is going to be important for ensuring the safety and the comfort and the certainty of our business travelers of their overall safety. Next slide. So last but not least is that the business travel going forward isn't likely to return to what was normal prior to 2020. It's going to be different in much the same way as after 9/11. The world never was exactly the same. Business travel is very, very likely to be at a more diminished level than it has been in the past. If for no other reason than many companies have come to the realization, much to their surprise, that they actually still can effectively run their business through the utilization of virtual meetings. Now, that obviously doesn't apply to all industries, but it is important to recognize that leadership and management is recognizing that there is a world that can continue on a virtual basis in which business can still be efficient and still be effective. There will be opportunities for business travel that remain to be critical, but it's also important to recognize that there will be a lot of pressure to maintain the cost containment that's associated with a reduction in business travel going forward. It's also going to be important to remember that technology is very likely going to be developed to address how can we minimize our need for face-to-face meetings, our need for in-person meetings in those high-risk environments where you don't have good COVID protection procedures. So that if you have to go to a developing country like the doctors mentioned earlier, and that their COVID protection measures don't really meet the standards that our business travel employees are looking for, that we could still be able to be effective in engaging in that market. So technology, including some innovative technology, is very, very likely to be sped up. For example, holographic technology, there's actually been a lot of emphasis on that over the past year by a number of companies to specifically address the issue of how do we deal with high quality virtual in-person experiences without so. So again, I think that that's an important component for us to focus upon of what technologies we can use, but recognizing that there will be some technological limitations as well, as I mentioned earlier, as it relates to things like travel passports related to COVID with regard to vaccinations or test results, just because of the difficulty and the complexity associated with data privacy and the security of that. So at the end of the day, the important thing for companies to remember is the business traveler's confidence in their safety and their ability to travel without contracting COVID-19 or any other pandemic disease will, in essence, be the driver for how rapidly business travel continues. And with that, I will turn it over to questions.